I wonder what was going through the king's head as he walked up the Mount of Olives, fleeing from his own kingdom, running for his life from his son. At a certain point, he must have reflected on the course of events that led him to this place. How had it come to this? What went wrong? This wasn't in the plans. How did his own flesh and blood turn out like this? As the king ponders these questions, he begins to work through the course of events that led him to the mess he's currently in. You see, one son from one of his wives, Amnon, would fall in love with his daughter from a different wife. The king's jaw starts to clench as he thinks about the decisions and actions that took place in these moments. The love-struck son said he was sick and asked if the king would send his daughter to make him some of that delicious bread that she makes. It seemed harmless enough at the time, so the king agreed. Well, the next thing the king heard about this whole situation was that his daughter's brother, his son, would force her into bed with him. When his daughter's other brother, Absalom, found out what had happened to his sister, he said, "Come and live with me." And for 2 years, he began a stretch in this moment of not saying one word to his brother, nothing, good or bad, hatred just welling up in his heart. The tears would not stop streaming down the king's face as he walked, this whole thing playing like a movie in front of him, as he thought about the get-together that all of his sons were invited to. And he remembered when Absalom insisted on his brother Amnon joining them. Thinking nothing of it, the king sent Amnon along with him. That day, it seemed as if the king had lost 2 sons. Absalom told his men to wait until Amnon got drunk, and then he commanded them to kill them. And they did. After the murder, Absalom took off and stayed away from home for 3 years. The king's military commander saw how heartbroken the king was over this whole situation, and he devised a plan on how to get the runaway son, Absalom, back at home with his dad. And the king agreed with one stipulation. He can come home, but he can't see my face. No interaction. For 2 years, Absalom lived in his father's kingdom without seeing his own father, until he got so fed up with it that he said, "Bring me in front of the king. And if he still thinks I'm guilty of something, just have him kill me." The king, now in the middle of remembering his story, stops walking for a moment. He remembers the hope that he had for restoration when he heard that Absalom wanted to come see him. He remembers the hope for what he and his son could accomplish together if they could finally figure out how to get along. 5 years without talking was too much. 5 years of no communication, 5 years without seeing his own son. How did he let it go this long? It was time to move this kingdom forward. The king remembered looking at his son as he walked in after 5 years of not seeing him. And his son came in front of him and bowed down in humility. And the king, without being able to help himself, grabbed his son and kissed him. Everything was gonna be okay. This whole situation was gonna get fixed. Their relationship would be restored. Or would it? Unfortunately, Absalom wasn't after restoration. He was out for the throne. This was a false humility displayed by his son, and it took a little while for the king to catch on. But eventually he realized that his own son was forming a conspiracy against him. A conspiracy filled with dishonesty, greed, pride, corruption, and a desire for power that would leave the king fleeing from his kingdom. His life in jeopardy by his own son. How had it come to this? What went wrong? This wasn't in the plans. How did his own flesh and blood turn out like this? Open your Bibles to 2 Samuel 14, and let's see what God has to teach us through the story of David and his son Absalom today. Isn't that self-serving, greedy, proud, boastful persona one that just kind of makes your stomach churn? I was walking through this message with my wife this week, and I was talking to her about how sad it was that David and Absalom couldn't figure out their relationship, because it's crazy to think what they could have accomplished together. Amanda then proceeded to remind me of some moments over the last 7 years of our marriage where I was a tad self-serving or greedy or selfish and chose to not work through things with her together. She loved reminding me about the time that she had the flu and I left her home with our 1-year-old son to go and grab lunch with a friend because that morning she told me she was feeling a little bit better. And then she reminded me that a couple days later, I got the same flu bug and basically in tears begged her to stay home to take care of me from work. After 3 days of similar stories and reminders from my beautiful wife, I got the message. I am self-serving. I am greedy. I am selfish. I am filled with pride. But I don't want to end up like Absalom did. We're going to be hopping around a bit from 2 Samuel 14 through 2 Samuel 18. So I'll do my best to let you know where we're at as we work through this intense story. But will you pray with me before we dig into God's word? Father, I'm grateful to be here. Teach us, Lord. Show us what it means to figure out things that need to be fixed and restored. Teach us what it means for us to go together and work together, Lord. Teach us through your word. We love you. It's in your son's name. Amen. All right away, here's what we learn about Absalom. Check out verses 25 and 26 in 2 Samuel 14. It says, in all Israel, there was not a man so highly praised for his handsome appearance as Absalom. From the top of his head to the sole of his foot, there was no blemish in him. Whenever he cut the hair of his head, he used to cut his hair once a year because it became too heavy for him. He would weigh it, and its weight was 200 shekels by the royal standard. He was a handsome, good-looking guy. There was not a blemish on him. His hair was long and heavy. And I don't know what it is, but guys with long hair are really good-looking dudes. This gives us a great picture, a great mental image of what to work forward. Did I mention that I was going to be talking about pride at all today? That's absurd. My wife married that. What was she thinking? Anyways, Absalom actually was a good-looking guy. He was already favored just from his appearance. But he missed what was said at his dad's anointing years before. 1 Samuel 16, verse 7, but the Lord said to Samuel, do not consider his appearance or his height, for I have rejected him. The Lord does not look at the things people look at. People look at the outward appearance, but the Lord looks at the heart. So he comes back into his dad's presence after 5 years and bows down in humility, and David kisses his son. All is well. But we're about to see where Absalom's heart really was. 2 Samuel 15, we'll start in verse 1. In the course of time, Absalom provided himself with a chariot and horses and with 50 men to run ahead of him. He would get up early and stand by the side of the road leading to the city gate. Whenever anyone came with a complaint to be placed before the king for a decision, Absalom would call out to him, hey, what town are you from? And he would answer, your servant is from one of the tribes of Israel. And then Absalom would say to him, look, your claims are valid and proper, but there is no representative of the king to hear you. And Absalom would add, if only I were appointed judge in the land, then everyone who has a complaint or case could come to me and I would see to it. I would make sure that they receive justice. Also, whenever anyone approached him to bow down before him, Absalom would reach out his hand, take a hold of him, and kiss him. Absalom behaved in this way toward all the Israelites who came to the king asking for justice. And so he stole the hearts of the people of Israel. Absalom is a smart guy, a proud guy, but a smart guy. As he parades himself around with a chariot and horses and 50 men running ahead of him, it's like a big dog and pony show. Look at me. Look at how great I am. And then he takes it to the next level. After receiving a welcoming back into the kingdom, he starts to woo the people of Israel. When someone has a complaint, he intercepts them and tells them how much better it would be if he were in charge. He begins to turn people one at a time against his father. He is stealing their favor. He wants to be liked and loved by the people. He wants their approval and their support, not because of some God-given purpose or mission, but because of his own mission, a self-serving mission for greed and power and wealth. He was playing his own game, and he was starting to play dirty. At the end of 4 years, we're in verse 7. At the end of 4 years, Absalom said to the king, "Let me go to Hebron and fulfill a vow I made to the Lord. While your servant was living at Geshur in Aram, I made this vow. If the Lord takes me back to Jerusalem, I will worship the Lord in Hebron." And the king said to him, "Go in peace." So he went to Hebron. And here's where it starts to get shady. Then Absalom sent secret messengers throughout the tribes of Israel to say, "As soon as you hear the sound of the trumpets, then say, 'Absalom is king in Hebron.'" 200 men from Jerusalem had accompanied Absalom. They had been invited as guests and went quite innocently, knowing nothing about the matter. While Absalom was offering sacrifices, he also sent for Ahithophel, the Gilonite, David's counselor, to come from Gilo, his hometown. And so the conspiracy gained strength, and Absalom's following kept on increasing. He lied to his father. He went behind his dad's back to take over his kingdom, and his movement started to gain strength. He was starting a movement, but it was a movement for Absalom, a movement driven by greed and pride and a desire for the wrong things. It's all self-serving. It's all about me. And because of Absalom's self-serving movement, David was forced to flee from his kingdom as Absalom gained more and more favor with the men of Israel. One of the saddest parts about this story is the wasted favor. We've got a smart guy, charming, good looking, with opportunity, and he took the favor that he had and used it to gain his own wealth and power. That was his mission. That was the game he was playing. How do I get more? How do I accumulate more? What must I do to move up? We see this in our culture all the time. The coworker who won't hesitate to throw someone under the bus just in order to save face or look good to the higher-ups within the organization. The parent who refuses to spend time with their kids because work just demanded too much of them. The kid who complains about not getting the new pair of tennis shoes while they sit in front of a 60-inch TV playing video games. There are parents who think I was at their house last night because of how closely that's hitting to home right now. But it's all self-serving. And Absalom was no different. I mean, what would the difference have been if he chose, from the moment his father kissed him, to take the we approach instead of the selfish one? I mean, just think about it. With all of the favor and all the intelligence and the charm and everything else, on top of who David already was, just imagine what these two could have accomplished together. But Absalom wasn't interested in together. He wanted what he wanted, and he wanted it all on his own. There was no loyalty with Absalom, no trust, no desire to learn or glean wisdom from those that had gone before him. And then something noteworthy happens. While David is in the process of fleeing from his son, they're marching away, and he notices a guy march past him that shouldn't be there. He's a foreigner, and so David says, "What are you doing? You don't need to fight this cause. This isn't your battle. Turn around. Go back." But Ittai replied to the king, verse 21. Ittai replied to the king, "As surely as the Lord lives and as my lord the king lives, wherever my lord the king may be, whether it means life or death, there will your servant be." David said to Ittai, "Go ahead, march on." So Ittai the Gittite marched on with all his men and the families that were with him. See, this foreigner understood loyalty like the king's own son didn't. And so they marched on together. Ittai was playing the right game, while Absalom was off playing a game all on his own. When Absalom chose to go against his father, to turn his back on his own dad and separate himself from him, it was because of his own selfish ambition. And then he started to rub it in. After trying to figure out how to show the world who he was and show his dad the status that he had, here's what Absalom decided to do. Skip ahead to chapter 16, verse 22 in 2 Samuel. So they pitched a tent for Absalom on the roof, and he slept with his father's concubines in the sight of all Israel. He stole his father's wives, his throne, his dignity, and his safety. He took everything from his dad. Unlike Jonathan, who we learned about last week. Completely opposite. Absalom took everything from his dad. And you thought your kids were bad. You're gonna go home and frame that C+ they got on their math final, because at least they're not doing that. But for Absalom, these were all temporary gains. Moth and rust do destroy. Human kingdoms fall apart. And Absalom's fell apart relatively quickly. All that favor that he had gained from people, from human beings, it wouldn't save him. He would learn what the proverb teaches us. Pride goes before destruction, a haughty spirit before a fall. Read about Absalom's demise in chapter 18, starting in verse 9. Now Absalom happened to meet David's men. He was riding his mule, and as the mule went under the thick branches of a large oak, Absalom's hair got caught in the tree. He was left hanging in midair while the mule he was riding kept on going. I love the Bible. That is fantastic. Skip ahead to verse 14. Joab said, "I'm not going to wait like this for you." So he took 3 javelins in his hand and plunged them into Absalom's heart while Absalom was still alive in the oak tree. And 10 of Joab's armor bearers surrounded Absalom, struck him, and killed him. Then Joab sounded the trumpet, and the troops stopped pursuing Israel, for Joab halted them. They took Absalom, threw him into a big pit in the forest, and piled up a large heap of rocks over him. Meanwhile, all the Israelites fled back to their homes. During his lifetime, Absalom had taken a pillar and erected it in the king's valley as a monument to himself, for he thought, "I have no son to carry on the memory of my name." He named the pillar after himself, and it is called Absalom's monument to this day. This is the inevitable outcome when you play the game for yourself. I mean, think about any team sport. What would it look like if you tried to play that sport as an individual? It just wouldn't work. When you try to play the game on your own, when you try to go through life pushing yourself forward and trying to win for you and for you only, it will end in destruction. I mean, what did Absalom have to show for it at the end of the day? A pillar, some rocks. That's what happens when you try to win the temporary and don't claim victory over eternity. I think today we can ask ourselves a really important question. What's your mission? What game are you playing? Who are you playing for, and who are you playing with? Because if you're out there on your own and you're trying to move forward for you, you're trying to push yourself forward, you're not gonna leave anything behind. Young or not so young, who is your mission for? Who are you playing this game of life for? As we push back against the greed and the pride and the desire for the wrong things that riddles our culture, I think that there is a way that this group, from the Tri-Valley to Brentwood to Walnut Creek, to those watching online or listening in with us, there is a way that we can make sure our mission does not become about us. Last week, as I sat and I listened to Pastor Steve commission us to take risks and to actively pursue God and to show our faith through action, I couldn't agree with his call more. He said, let's go. Let's go. So yes, let's go. Let's take risks. Let's take chances. Let's move forward. But let's add one more part to that. Something that Absalom missed and had no desire for. Something that you don't work toward when you're living out the mission that you want and not the mission that God desires. I agree, let's go, but let's go together. Let's be men and women, young and old, people from different backgrounds, different families, different socioeconomic status. Those of us who are really connected to God, super close to God, and those of us who are trying to figure out who God is. Let's move forward with one another. Let's go together. Don't waste your favor on yourself. We need to get to the point as a group and as a movement where we're saying, I'm gonna pour everything I am into using my favor to bring life to somebody else. Whether that's my family or my neighbors or my community or my world. So we sacrifice for others, we serve others, we push other people forward. And it starts with the people that we're sitting next to right now. We have to care for one another. I wonder how much David thought about this as he fled from his son. I wonder how much he thought about how different it would be if they could be moving their kingdom forward together. I mean, Absalom has strengths, he has gifting, but he was using them for him and for him only. And then I wonder how much David reflected back to his time as a young leader and the conflicts that he had with Saul after killing Goliath. And they come back to town and everyone, they're coming out of the woodworks proclaiming Saul has slain his thousands and David his tens of thousands. And from that moment on, Saul viewed David as a threat to his kingdom instead of a partner to move things forward with. I mean, just think what the two of them could have accomplished together. And now David, whose son couldn't figure that part out, who couldn't handle not being the guy, who tried to take over the kingdom, and his greed and his pride eventually led him to his death. And David, in the midst of all that pain and all that hurt and betrayal, hears the news of his son's death, and he sits and mourns. Verse 33, the king was shaken. He went up to the room over the gateway and wept. And as he went, he said, "Oh, my son Absalom, my son Absalom, if only I had died instead of you. Oh, Absalom, my son, my son. If only I had died instead of you." The kid who turned his kingdom against him, who betrayed him. And David still says, if only it was me who died and not you. Like last week, this father-son duo gives us such a great picture for our church of what we could be and what not to be. So I've got a call for us. To the more experienced and wiser people in the room that may have a few more gray hairs than some of us. We need you to have grace like David, but we need you to step up in a way that David didn't. David had a heart after God, but he did not teach his sons to do the same. How are they supposed to learn if we aren't going to teach them? Teach the younger crowd. Share your wisdom. Give insight. Show the way. We need you. And just a heads up, the younger crowd is gonna make some knucklehead decisions sometimes, and they're gonna say some stupid things. Please be gracious and be patient with the energy and craziness that comes from a group of younger people. After all, I think if Jesus were walking around the church today, we'd find him splashing people in the baptismal. He'd be grabbing bagels and cookies and he'd be eating all of them. He'd probably take kids and throw them up in the air and people would be like, who is? Someone would go to him and say, Jesus, were you born in a barn? He'd say, yeah, it's in Bethlehem. You should check it out sometime. Sometimes it might seem like some of us were born in a barn. But here's the deal. We need a rambunctious group of Christ followers, not a rambunctious group of self-servers. We need your help getting there to figure that out. And for the younger Cornerstoners, you need to ask for advice and you need to listen. You have access to years of wealth, of health and experience. Maybe wealth, that'd be cool. Sitting at your fingertips, sitting next to you. We need you to be the exact opposite of Absalom. Last week, Pastor Steve gave us some great stuff for what it means to be great leaders. Well, we need to learn what it means to be great followers too. Keep taking risks, but allow those who have gone before you to be there and pick you up when you fall and teach you what you did wrong. Let God push you forward. You don't know how to do all this stuff yet. Learn from those who have gone before you, and don't forget, we are favored together, so let's go together. Look, church, if we want to waste our favor, here's what we need to do. Be greedy, be filled with pride, hold grudges, and don't lift a finger for somebody else. Don't invest in anybody else. Strive for your own mission. This is what will cause us to think about me and not we. And if we waste the opportunity that God gives us now, why would he trust us with what's next? I believe with all that I have that Cornerstone as a community is on the verge of something huge, but we need to show God that he can trust us with it. And practically, here's what this looks like for us that are a part of this community, to not fall into the same trap or to play the same game that Absalom was playing. For some of us, it starts with forgiveness, and that might include someone who attends this church here with you. Do you need to forgive someone? Do you need to ask for forgiveness from someone? Is there someone you need to move past an argument or a disagreement with? Act on it. And I know these aren't easy because this always doesn't work out the way we want it to. Unfortunately, love doesn't always result in more love, but we remember that Jesus Christ was crucified not in spite of his love, but because of it. Love is risky. For some of us, it's a practice in humility. We need to start our day wanting to achieve great things because of whose we are, not who we are. That's all the identity we need. We belong to God. Start there. Let that drive you. And if you find pride to be a real issue for you, then this week, try doing a couple Secret Service acts. Do 3 things this week that will lift someone's burden. Do someone's laundry, fill someone's car with gas, clean someone's room, sit and just listen to someone. And then do something crazy. Don't tell a soul about it. Because pride and service do not go hand in hand. Pride and love do not go hand in hand. For some of us, it's a practice of generosity. We need to get rid of that greed that's got us imprisoned. Give away 3 things this week. Don't give away junk. Give away something that has some value to you, but will be a blessing to somebody else. And don't go and buy something to replace the thing that you give away. Moving past greed means moving past the things we've attached ourselves to. And lastly, for some of us, it's time to step up and invest in someone. Pick someone to invest in or plug into a ministry where you can give direction and insight and wisdom to someone who needs it. Join life groups, lead people. By the way, this is a need that all of us have, no matter how old we are. I just read a report from the National Mentoring Partnership this past week, and the difference in health, aspirations, and achievement is astronomical when someone has a mentor. We need people to invest in us, and we need to invest in people. If we're gonna go together, we need to use the gifts and resources that God has blessed us with. And we have to care for one another. Because if we can't figure out how to care for each other, how are we gonna care for anyone outside of this group? You're favored, but you're favored together. Don't waste that favor pushing yourself forward, chasing more favor from the wrong places, and becoming greedy and prideful and self-serving in the process. 15 years ago, I was on a mission trip to Kenya where I learned really for the first time how much other people matter. I was a freshman in high school and we built roofs for some churches in a village called Kericho. And I've never seen so much gratitude from a group of people than I saw in those 2 weeks. Well, at the end of those 2 weeks, we had our team debrief and we went on safari, which was incredible. And I remember being on the safari and the guide starts talking to us. We're on the safari for about 5 hours on this tour. And the guide says, hey, we're gonna get out pretty soon because we're gonna go see some rhinos. It's like, awesome. So the guide starts telling us all these statistics about rhinos and how incredible they are as creatures and as a group. And we get to the place where we're gonna get out and he says, before you get out, I have one rule. Do not touch the rhinos. Now, the only thing that I thought of as soon as he said that was, I'm gonna touch a rhino. So I get out of the little safari mobile and the guide is like locked onto me. I think he knew I was up to something fishy. I get out of the safari mobile and I see the rhino that I'm like, I got my target, that sounds bad, but I got the rhino that I'm gonna touch, and I asked my friend to come take a picture or pretend to take a picture of me so that I could touch this rhino. Well, something happened behind the guide and he turned his head and I was like, here's my opportunity to touch the rhino. So I reached my hand out. It's the backside. I'm not gonna mess with the front part of a rhino. That's crazy. I reached my hand out and I touched the rhino. Here's what happened. The rhino didn't move at all. He just kept eating grass or whatever he was doing, but he did do this. He went, I was like, excuse me, I need to use the restroom. Because I didn't realize that rhinos talked like that. And he talked to me and I was frightened. Because as soon as the rhino went, I remembered the statistics that the guide was telling us. He said rhinos weigh like 1.1 or 1.2 million pounds. I don't remember the exact number. And they run at 30 miles an hour, which is faster than a squirrel runs. I can guarantee you that if a squirrel is running full speed at me, I'm not that scared. I'm still a little scared because they have bushy tails and teeth, but I'm not that scared. If a rhino's running full speed at me, I'm frightened. Here's the other thing I learned about rhinos. When they charge as a group, and they can't see more than 30 feet in front of them. So imagine a group of rhinos charging at full speed, 30 miles per hour. They can't see what's ahead of them, and they're just saying, our big horn versus whatever you're gonna put in front of us, we're gonna win every time. So I'm thinking about this while the rhino's talking to me, and I'm like, I'm gonna have a bunch of rhinos chasing after me. But this brought me to my favorite part about rhinos. When rhinos are running together as a group, they are called a crash. Actually, when they're just hanging out talking about their day, they're still called a crash because of what they're capable of. Seems pretty fitting, right? But when I think about Pastor Steve's call to us last week and his encouragement for us to take risks, and I think about the potential of a group that chooses to say, let's go, but let's go together, I think about rhinos. This group can become a movement, like a crash of rhinos moving full speed straight ahead, and I believe we're well on our way. So let's go together and accomplish all that God has in store for us, because it's way more difficult to talk about the revival of the Bay Area if we can't figure out how to love and exist and work together. And maybe we only know what's just ahead of us, but we really don't care what's beyond our line of sight, because we know we're gonna trust God with it. And really, whatever is beyond our line of sight isn't something that we should be worried about. Whatever that thing is should be worried about us, because we're ready to take risks and we're ready to have faith and have victory over things that God wants to have victory over. And we tear down walls and barriers and crash through things that God has had enough of. Running full speed without knowing what's ahead is risky, but it proves our faith as we move forward with one another together. I'm gonna ask you to do something that might be a little awkward, but I'm okay with it because I'm here and you're there. So can you guys all stand up and grab hands with the people next to you? Whether you're in Livermore, Brentwood, Walnut Creek, if you're watching online with your family, if you're by yourself watching online, then hold your own hand. Here's the deal. When this group becomes a movement, when we become more than just people who come hang out on a weekend and hear a message and sing some songs and then go home, when we live life as we and not as me, when we become an unstoppable force like a crash of rhinos, then we change and we grow, and the people around us change and they grow, and our communities change and they grow. And we play the game not for things that are temporary, but for that which is eternal. And through this, we continue to become men and women who know how to lead our families and our organizations and our peers and our coworkers. Men and women who hold each other to standards of dignity and integrity and character and respect. Generations young and old who know how to work together and care for one another and have each other's back. We continue to become a church that loves and sacrifices, and we just look out of our minds to people because of how much we care for one another and care for anyone we come in contact with. We continue to become people who have encountered the living Christ, and we bring others into that same type of encounter. Not so that we have a big church, but so that people go from death to life and they figure out what life to the full really means. Imagine what that would look like if we went together. Imagine what we could do together. Let's not miss it like Absalom did. Let's not miss it like Saul did last week. And whatever we do, let's do it together, because when I think about my church, and I think about this movement that I get to be a part of, and I think about what's on the horizon for us, I think that this group is a group that is going to crush Satan and his plans for the Bay Area. This group will see Christ glorified and exemplified and pursued and reflected, and we are ready to be part of a movement that can't be beaten when we go together. An unstoppable force, playing the right game for the right reasons with the right people that God is going to use to impact his kingdom for eternity. So let's go together. And as we pour out our praise and we sing together right now, alongside our brothers and sisters, I'll leave you with David's last words from the psalm that he wrote while he was fleeing from his son Absalom. He said, "From the Lord comes deliverance. May your blessing be on your people." God, may your blessing be on your people. May your favor be on your people, God. God, give us opportunities this week to show whose we are. God, give us opportunities to show how united we are, that we're ready to move forward with your vision for this area, God, to change lives. God, that people will know you and grow closer to you. Families will be put back together. People will be healed. Lives will be changed, God. Father, do what you do best. Use this group as a movement to push forward what you have in store for us. We love you, God. It's in your son's name. Amen.